soldier, don't know in the army. We have to fight, although we have to cry. Holding up, we have to hold the freedom banner. Holding up, we have to hold it up until we die. We are soldiers in the army. In the army, we have to fight, although we have to stand holding. We have to hold the freedom banner. We have to hold it up until we die. We are soldiers in God's army. In the army, we gotta fight. We have to fight, although we have to fight.
Good morning and welcome to Sankofa African American 3D Museum Veterans Day event, honoring African American women during World War II. My name is Lawrence Walker, President and CEO of Sankofa African American 3D Museum, and I will be your host for this morning's event. Veterans Day is a time to recognize and honor those who served in the United States Armed Forces. Too often, Black women and men are left out of the history book. Our focus today is on Black women veterans of World War II. African Americans in this country mobilized behind the Double Victory campaign against racial oppression in the United States, as well as ethnic oppression aboard during that time. During that time, African American women faced a third enemy, one that held them back due to their gender and race. To shed some more light on this, my guest today is historian, publisher, and reference librarian, Dr. Janice Sims Woods. Dr. Woods began her career in library science in 1972 as a reader advisor in the Black Studies Division of Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library in Washington, D.C. This experience led to her interest and specialization in African American history. She is a founder associate editor of Surge, a scholarly journal on Black women which published double-stitch Black women write about mothers and daughters. Additionally, she is the founder of a small publishing company, Afro Resources Incorporated, which published in 1993 calendar predicting Black women served in Women Army Corps during World War II. These are some of many of her accomplishments over the years. Welcome, Dr. Janice Sims Woods. We are honored to have you come aboard this program.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you, thank you. You know, too often we forget our history and we forget our past. And it's important today to focus on African-American women as well as men that served during this time. Let's get right into it, Dr. Woods. During World War II, African-American women served in this country, but they were also fighting another war, which was race and gender in the United States. Can you go into detail about some of the African-American women that faced what they experienced during World War II?
Okay, when World War II started, of course, we were still a segregated society. So most of the women that went in, when they went in and they served in units that were segregated. So their unit, they were housed separately. When they went to the dining room, there was a sign on there that said colored. So they had to eat at separate tables. They trained separately. When they were training, everything that they did was separate. So even like for recreation, if they went to the swimming pool, they went to the swimming pool last. so that the water could be changed before the white women could use it. In training, if they were using the gas mask or anything, they used those last so they could be clean. So everything was segregated.
Thank you. You know, let's get to the beginning. What was life like for African American women of descent before entering the war? What do you feel the experiences, or what were African American women dealing with just before the war broke out?
Well, again, segregated society. So many of them were domestic workers. Many of them were lived on farms, so lived as tenant farmers and things of that nature. So they worked in cotton fields, rice fields, and things like that. So there were a few educated Black women who were teachers and things, but for the most part, most of the women had non-professional jobs.
Good. You know, talk a little bit about Mary McLeod Bethune, and also talk about her relationship, her friendship with President Franklin D. Roosevelt's wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, and how they were the steam that pushed for Black women to get into the armed forces. Can you briefly just talk about that part of history?
Yes, Mary McLeod Bethune is one of my sheroes, and she served on President Roosevelt's what they call the Black Cabinet during in his administration, and she was, of course, personal friends with the Roosevelts. She was one of the ladies that, when they started the legislation to get women into the military, it was Congresswoman Edith Noyes Rogers, Mary McLeod Bethune, and Eleanor Roosevelt. And many times they met at Bethune's office, National Council of Negro Women's office. And so she passed this legislation to get women into the military. The legislation was signed by President Roosevelt in May of 1942. And she encouraged Black women to enlist and went to the post when Black women complained of discrimination. For instance, now she personally helped Debbie Roundtree, who was one of the in that first graduating class, to get her application, as she was friends with Debbie Roundtree's grandmother. Debbie worked at the National Council of Negro Women, and when Congresswoman Rogers and Eleanor Roosevelt and Bethune were working there, Bethune asked Debbie one day, she said, Debbie May, would you like to serve in the military? And of course, Debbie May said yes. But then she went back to Charlotte, and Debbie was almost arrested at the post office in Charlotte when she went to get her application, because the man said, they take no colored women in the military. You get out here before I call the police. So they had to get in touch with Bethune, and Bethune had her to come to Richmond, and that's how she got in. So they were just very active in making sure that women got into the military. So Bethune and Eleanor Roosevelt were also active in getting the military to send a group of black blacks overseas during World War II to sort the mail, and that became the 688 Central Postal Division.
That's a bit of a lot of good history you get. I don't want to get too far. I don't want the public to know too much that I'm going to ask, and you covered some of my questions, but that's okay. I'll repeat it again, which is fine. Let's go back. What my readings and a lot of my research over the years talked about how when the war broke out, when Roosevelt admitted and allowed women to come in as WACs, W-A-C, and then eventually it became WAC, Women Army Auxiliary Corps. White women were allowed to come in, but they did not want Black women to come in. What do you think the reasons behind that was?
Okay, it actually started out as the WAAC, the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps, and then Eisenhower changed it over to the Women's Army Corps. Black women, when they came in, it was basically an experiment. They didn't really expect this to work. So what they did was they said, well, Black women would come in at 10% of what of white women who came in. So it was already legislated that it would not be, they would not come in equal numbers.
What do you think some of the reasons that Black women joined the military? Why would they want to leave their families or leave their homes and go into the military during that time?
Well, just like the men, they felt it was their civic duty to join and help the U.S. win in the war. And one of the recruiting techniques was that they would ask the women, "Don't you want to go in to the military and help your men who are already enlisted?" So that was one of the techniques that they did use to get women to come in.
Do you know of some of the ages of the women, young and old, that went into the military? Were they single? Were they married? Any brief history about that?
Okay, most of the women, could join from 18 years on up. And I had one instance where I saw where one lady joined because her son was enlisted. So she was probably in her 30s. So you could go up, I think, until maybe around in your 50s, maybe. But I don't think anybody that old participated. But I know that one woman joined because her son was in there. Most of the women were single. Uh, I don't think too many of them were married. But if you did have children, you had to give custody of your children up to a relative so that you could go in.
Talk about some of the military bases across the country that a lot of the Black women went to, mainly Fort Des Moines, Iowa, where that first wave of Black women, once they were allowed to go in, Major Charity Adams early, and we'll get to her in a second. Talk about some of the bases, mainly Fort Des Moines, Iowa.
Well, yes, that was the first base that they went to. And most of them stayed there. There was another base at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, that some of them went to. And then when they got ready to for the overseas training, they went to Fort Okotoff, Georgia. But most stayed at Fort Des Moines because they were, again, a segregated unit. And no commander would ask for a Black unit to come. So for the most part, most of the women stayed there. So one of the things that they talked about was that they were good at marching because they practiced marching every day. So because most of them stayed there the whole time. So that was the major base for the women. For Des Moines.
Let me just stop you a second. Audience, anybody coming in, please, will you mute your microphone, people, so that we can hear some of the response from Dr. Ross, so we can hear the response. Let's talk, you talked about the Army bases, segregation. Can you fill in some more information why in the Army bases white women were separated from the Black women, which is probably the same inclines of what the Black officers went through? Talk about what the women went through with that segregation. They ate at separate banquets. They worked out separately.
Yes.
Oh, you talk about that.
Well, as I said, everything was segregated. So again, the housing was segregated, the barracks were segregated. So when they went to the dining room, there was a table, two tables there. It would say colored. So that meant that they had to eat at those tables. Again, when they went for recreation, if they went swimming, they went again last during the week so that the water could be changed. And again, like for training, whatever training they had, it was segregated. And the one talked about that gas mask being cleaned, at the end of the week after all of them were finished training, so that they would be clean for the white women to use. So as I said, everything was segregated. Now, one of the things that they did complain about, they did complain to Member Bethune and NAACP about those colored tables being there, and finally they were taken off. Charity Adams talked about the fact that on the weekends you could go in, because when you went into each went in as a unit. So, but on the weekends you could go in as you wanted to. So what the ladies decided to do was they would go sit at the different tables. And when complaint came back to Charity Adams about the fact that, well, they're eating at these tables, and she acted like she didn't know. But of course, Charity Adams knew everything that was going on with her girls. So they found ways to get around some of the discrimination.
On some of these bases, how many Army bases that women went into, talk about basic training, their experience doing basic training. Can you elaborate on that?
Okay. Well, basically, there were 4 different schools. There was an officer candidate school. And basically the first women that went in, those first women that went in were college graduates. So they went into the officer training schools because they were going to be training the other blacks that came in. There was a cook and baker school. There was a transportation school. And then there was a secretarial school. Later on, there was some training for them to work in hospitals. Of course, there were some complaints, and of course, there were some complaints because some of the black educated black blacks were given menial jobs like cleaning and laundry work, then because they were not trained for any of the specialized jobs.
Now, let's talk about the great Major Charity Adams Early and her regiment, the 6888. Just imagine, women, Major Charity Adams Early had a regiment of 800, I believe, 55 all-black unit in her service. I'll allow you talk about that. I'd like you to elaborate on Major Charity Adams Early, her beginning and her end, because she was a phenomenal woman. I had a chance to meet her just before she passed away.
Yeah, I went to visit when I was doing my dissertation. She was part of my dissertation. So I went to see her at least 3 times during that time. Very outstanding woman. And of course, again, she was in that first class and she ended up becoming the commander. So she was the one now, 6888 was formed in May of 1945, I think it was. Yeah. And so they served overseas. And her book, One Woman's Army, Black Officer Remembers the WAC, she talks about her experiences, not only in the United States as the commander, but also taking this group of women overseas to sort the mail, and which was a phenomenal job because the mail had been backed up because of the war. And so the ladies had the mailing list for everybody, not just the military folk, but everybody that was in the European theater. They had the mailing list. So they had to get that mailing list, those boxes, things. And so some of the boxes that were coming in, a family member might send, Aunt Jean might send a box of cookies or a cake or something like that. So one of the ladies was telling me that they had this big room that they had. It was backed out because they worked 24/7, and so they blacked the windows out so that the enemy couldn't see them and bomb them. And so they worked 24 hours. And she said the rats in there were as big as cats, and they had to wear special clothing because again, some of that food that had come in was soggy and wet and rotted. So they had special waterproof clothing that they had to wear. So they just had but they did a magnificent job of handling this mail that they got out. They tried all kinds of things, but sometimes the writing would be where you couldn't read it, and they would try to figure out, there might have been 7 John Browns in there, and so they had to figure out, well, which John Brown does this belong to? So they would try to look at the newspaper, if it was wrapped up in newspaper or something like that. So they tried all kinds of ways to figure out how to get the correct mail and boxes to the enlisted folks.
Let's go back to the Army bases, and then we're going to take a pause. And audience out there, please, if you want to chat and have some questions, your Q&A questions will come up in about 20 minutes. But talk about the drilling. I think you talked a little bit about the drilling, the different regiments and drilling and marchings that they had to do. Your feeling about that experience and some of the response you got from these women that drilled day and night.
Okay. Well, most of them told me they, again, because no other commander would ask for a Black unit, again, most of them stayed at Fort Des Moines. And they were one of the best marching groups. They would get awards for the best marching group that would come out during the day. And of course, they won the awards a lot of time because they were there such a long time and they did a lot of marching and practicing. So again, they just, since everything was segregated, so they just had to, they did everything with their unit.
Dr. Sims Woods, your last conversation, you talked about the Major Charity Adams Early and her regiment of the 6888. And we know her regiment was a size of 585 officers, as well as women that served under their ranks. Can you elaborate a little bit more? I mean, just imagine, Dr. Woods, if you had a regiment of 855 women, how would you command that? And I take my hat off for what she did during that period.
Oh, yes. And I say, Charity said she knew everything that was going on in her group. She kept a very close eye on her, as she called them, her girls. Even like things such as them going out into the community. In the United, when they were at Fort Des Moines and Fort Huachuca, she would make sure that she knew the places that they could go to out in the city if they wanted to go out for entertainment, because some places would let Blacks come in and some wouldn't. So she really wanted to make sure that they were well protected and that they were treated nicely. So she just did all kinds of things to make sure that her girls were the best. Just for instance, something simple as getting your hair done. She always made sure that there was a beautician available, so that, because a lot of times, when you were out in the training, it might be raining, or she made sure that they could get their hair done. She made sure that they had that there were uniforms, or that they had the proper uniforms, because Eisenhower worked to make sure that the uniforms, when they first came in, it was not the best of uniforms. So she really worked hard to make sure that her girls looked nice and that they would train very well. So she knew everything that was going on with her girls. So I really enjoyed talking with her. She gave a lot of information about what it was like just to these ladies. Sometimes, of course, a lot of them were rural ladies, hadn't been out of their towns in their lives. So she had to make sure that they were trained how to first of all be military women, and also how to act as they went out into the community.
Yes, I'm listening to what you're saying. I remember one of the interviews I did with one of the women, and I always end with the final question: give me your feelings about Major Charity Adams Early. And they would stop me really fast, as she was our commander. She was for us. She was behind us. We was wrong. She would let us know. But she respected us, and we respected her. If she said that hair's got to be cut short, it's got to be cut short. If your dress was short, she would correct you right on the field. Let's talk about that. Uniforms, the uniforms that they wore back in those days, those skirts, and maybe you can explain to me, the skirts had to be below the kneecaps. Am I correct?
Yes, they did. So that was the dress of the day. So they had to follow those rules, because yes, dresses had to be below the knees, and of course, whatever job that you had to do that day, if you were working, like for instance, if you were in the transportation pool, you had a certain outfit that you wore for the transportation pool. So the clerk, the ladies that were clerks, everybody had again a uniform that they had to wear for that particular job they were doing. If they were a cook in the kitchen, they had to wear those white uniforms. So so she made sure that they would dress properly, just like whatever the white units were doing as far as dress. She made sure that her girls had the same types of clothing.
Great. Talk about, if you can reflect on possibly 2, maybe 3 Black women that stood out in your mind during World War II. To give you one example, First Lieutenant Martha Putney. Give me, if you have a history behind her, as well as maybe 1 or 2 more that you can talk about.
Okay. Well, Dr. Martha Putney and I worked at Howard University together, so that's when I found out that she was in the military. She was a college grad when she went in, and she later commanded a group of WACs that were assigned to a military hospital in the Chicago suburbs. And of course, she had to win over the community, because the community did not want WACs in their community. So she had to really work hard to make sure that they were accepted, and that they were given. Once those WACs left, they got awards and things and commendations from the community, because of the work that they did in the hospital. And although there was also a women's an Army nursing corps. The WACs also helped out in hospitals. They would do things like they would take the gentlemen for walks, or they would help them write letters home. Sometimes they would work in the operating room with the Army nurses, so that so they really were very, very helpful in those situations. And one of the stories that she told me that she did one time, of course, transportation was also segregated. And so she was riding a troop of transport on a train one day. And of course, she would not sit in that segregated area where the caboose was, where you got all the cold and the soot and everything came back to you. Well, he decided to call the military police on her. And of course, when the military police got there, they had to salute her because she was a higher rank. So she was really, really, she tells a very good story. Her book is When the Nation Was in Need, Blacks in the Women's Army Corps during World War II. So that's a good book to read about her experience. Now, when she first went in, she tried to keep a diary, but until she became an officer, she could not keep that diary. So she had to try to remember what went on. And then once she became an officer, she could write this diary, and this is how she was able to write her book. Another lady, of course, was Debbie Roundtree. And she was also in that first class. She was a college grad, and she was her grandmother was a friend of Bethune's. She became a recruiter. She was first assigned to the transportation school, but she told them that she was more literate. So they told her, well, since you like to talk so much, we're going to send you around the country to recruit black women. One of the things that she talked about that she was so very proud of, that she went back to Spelman, which is where school where she graduated, to recruit. And she was able to meet with one of her former instructors. During her time at Spelman, she was almost ready to leave because she didn't have the money to stay there. And one of the white teachers paid her way to finish up Spelman. So she was able to save part of her paycheck. And when she went back, she was able to repay this lady, this former teacher who helped her get through undergrad school. Eddie McCabe collaborated with Debbie Roundtree for Almighty Justice, My Life in the Civil Rights Movement. Because Debbie was instrumental once she got out and went to law school. She was very instrumental. She worked on Howard University's campus, which is where the people met when they were doing Brown versus Board of Education training and everything. So she helped, as a law student, she helped those lawyers get the materials together for the court cases. So very, very instrumental in the civil rights after she got out of the military. Another lady was Clementine Skinner. Now, Clementine came in a little bit later, and I knew her when I was working with the Association for the Study of African American Life History. Knew her for many years. She never talked about her. I never knew she was in the military. But we were in Dayton, Ohio one day, and I invited for a conference, and I invited Charity Adams to come. And Clementine Skinner walks down the hall and hollers, "There's my commander." I had no idea that she had been in the military, but Clementine served, she was in the WAC band, and that was the 404th Army Service Forces band. And this was the first and only all Black, all female band in the military. So during that time, and they traveled the country, they played at parades and war bond rallies and things of that nature. And they were also entertaining the troops from time to time. And then when it was heard that the band was going to be disbanded, there was so much commotion about that, especially because the community felt that it was a morale booster. And so they decided to keep the band intact.
Let's talk, I'm glad you brought up Roundtree. Roundtree, for what I remember reading, was a rebel on campus. She wasn't taking it. She wasn't taking it. So she would speak out, and if the commanding officers wasn't listening, she went off base, and she got to. I seen photos of Eleanor Roosevelt and Mary McLeod Bethune, and she sat and dined with them, voicing her opinion about what was going on in that base. Can you talk about that?
Yes, Debbie was one of those. Like you say, she was a rebel, and so she and some of the other ladies would go off campus. They would go off base mailbox and send their complaints into Mary McLeod Bethune and Mrs. Roosevelt and of course the NAACP, so that they would come out there and investigate the discrimination that they were telling them about. So yeah, she was very, very, very outspoken. And of course, in everyday life after she came out of the military, continued as an outspoken person. But yeah, she was very, very outspoken in the military about the discrimination that was going on there.
That's great. That leads to me to my next question. Some Black women personally experience racism and discrimination in the military. Can you talk about that? You mentioned Roundtree, but can you elaborate a little bit more on what these African American women went through during that period?
Well, again, they since they were under segregation, they had to do everything. Everything was done with your unit. So this was an all-Black unit, and nothing was done separate from that. So again, if they went swimming, whatever they did, they had to do as a unit. And so it was segregated. Now, one of the ways that again that they got around the dining room was to go to the different tables on the weekend. So they just found different ways to get around trying to get some of the stuff that was going on with them. For instance, Debbie talked about the fact that some of the prisoners were treated better than them. They could. She went with Bethune went down to the dining area, and she said, "This is as far as I can go because we're not allowed to eat there." Even in the office, she was an officer by that time, but she was not allowed to eat in that particular area. So they talk about the discrimination, and they, some 50 years later, when I was interviewing them, they could kind of laugh about some of the things that went on. Martha Putney talks about, by the time later on when the barracks were integrated, she was there, and one of the WACs came in and saw her and refused to stay there. And of course, this lady, the commander, told them, "Oh no, that this is how it is." And so that she said that lady was so good to her from there on out. But they again, they were just segregated it, and that was all they could. They had to abide by what the military said. So, but they again found some kind of ways to get around some things.
Yes. Can you talk about the training that Black women received to prepare for overseas duties? Naturally, we know they were on the Army base and they trained there, but were there any further trainings that prepared them, like Major Charity Adams Regiment, how they had prepared to go to England, then they went to France? Can you briefly explain what that training was?
Yeah, the WACs that was going to be going overseas were sent to Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, to further train. And Oglethorpe was the third WAC training center. It was one of the largest in the country. And so they were there from February 43 through December 45. Again, they were given all kinds of training, but one of the main things that they were trained on was they had further training on the gas mask and how to distinguish the different gases so that, they could be prepared just in case, a bomb fell or something, and they had to get those gas masks on as soon as possible. So they were trained really especially on how to use those gas masks and to be really, really diligent in making sure that they smell those different gases and act accordingly.
Audience, in about 5 minutes, we're going to open it up for any questions that you may have with Dr. Woods. Any questions you may have, or if you want to put your question inside the chat column at the bottom, you can do that too. Also, Black women were treated by white United States military personnel. How do you feel they were treated back during that time, some of the Black women during World War II? I think you kind of covered it, but can you elaborate on it some more? Yes.
Yes. Well, they were, again, that's where Charity Adams came in. So she protected her girls. because most of them did not come in contact with a lot of the military personnel. So they, but when they did, of course, you know, you had to salute, you had to do things of that nature. So you had to they had to treat everybody respectfully. Now Charity talks about the fact that sometimes, even though she was an officer, sometimes if she was walking down the street and another officer would be approaching her, they would cross the street to keep from saluting. So there were just these things that, of course, they were things that just happened, and it was expected. It wasn't anything that she was not used to, being a Black woman in a segregated society. So they were used to. I didn't ever hear any of them say that they were called any names, but I'm sure probably when people are not hearing this, they may have been called some derogatory names and everything. So, but again, Charity tried her best to protect her girls as much as she could.
Audience, once again, in about 2 minutes, I'm going to open up the line so you can ask Dr. Woods any questions that you may want to ask her for this segment. Please prepare your questions and unmute yourself in a second. One more question I want to bring to Dr. Woods. What were some of the what was some of the sign work that Black women did when they were on these Army bases? What were some of their duties and some of the assignments that they had to do?
Well, again, most of them, they had 4 schools. There was the Officer Candidate School, there was the Cookton Baker School, there was a Transportation School, and then there was Secretarial School. So most of them were trained in those areas, and that was the areas where they worked. Now, again, some of them were relegated to laundry and cleaning positions. So that was some of the problems that discrimination that came back to Eleanor Roosevelt, Bethune, and NAACP, that they were relegated to because they weren't given any specialized training. But like I say, for instance, if you were in the Cookton Baker School, for instance, you had to learn how to cook for a large number of people. So most of the time when you cook for a family, you know, your small family. But in the military, you know, there was a lot of people. So you had to learn how to cook for a large number of people. So it was a different type of training that you got. And the ladies talked about, especially at Fort Huachuca, they had a very new kitchen with all the latest utensils and everything that they had for that particular time period. So they learned how to, again, to cook for a large number of people. If you were in the transportation pool, for your vehicle, you had to know how to, if that vehicle stopped running, you need to know how to get under that hood and make it start working again. You had to know how to change the tire, because one of the things such as AAA that you could call to come out and help you. So if you had a vehicle, you had to really know how to make sure that vehicle ran properly, so that you can get from one place to the other, because that was how things were delivered in those days, by vehicles. So you had to really make sure that vehicle was working properly. So again, whatever school you were trained in, whatever you were trained to do, that was your job.
I got one question that came in the chat from Mr. Z. Wayne Johnson in California. He wanted to know what actions, heroistic actions, Black women wax accomplished during that time, like many received medals of honor. Are you familiar with that?
They won a lot of medals that they received. Now, the 688 just received a congressional honor this past year, and of course, there's also a monument erected at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, in their honor. But for the most part, most of them said they did not receive a lot of awards or anything. When one WAC said that when they were just let out of the military, and most of them also, I only interviewed one that stayed in for the one or two that stayed in, but most of them said they were not told that they could even stay in after World War II. So they just came back home and did what they went back to doing the jobs that they were doing before they went into the military, most of them. So even that training did not train them, did not make sure that they could get a decent job when they came out of the military.
Any questions out there, public? And if so, please unmute yourself so we can hear you talk. Any questions? Anybody out in the audience? If not, we will go on. What were some of the, I think you just briefly talked about that. What were some Black women military service helped them to advance educationally and occupationally after the war? How did that benefit the women during that period?
Okay. As I said, now for my 3 women that I interviewed that I used for my dissertation, for the 4 women, 3 of them were college graduates when they went in. For instance, Charity Adams came out and most of them used the GI Bill. They she went back to get her master's degree, and so she taught on the college level. Debbie Roundtree came out and went to Howard University's law school. Martha Putney came out and did her master's and PhD in history, and then she taught on the college level. Now, Clementine Skinner went to a sewing school. She used the GI Bill to do that. But she told me, she said, Janet, I was so interested in education. I just loved it so much. She said, I went on and she got her PhD and taught on the college level using that GI Bill. Now, one of the WAC reunions that Brenda Moore and I went to back in the 90s when we were doing our research, I went to one of the WAC reunions, and there was someone from the military there to talk to the ladies about the GI Bill, because although some knew about the fact they could use the GI Bill, some didn't. And they wanted the ladies to know that they were eligible to use this GI Bill to further their education. So there was some interest in trying to get them to, the ones that did not know about the bill, that they could use it to further their education.
I got a text from chat from Monica, and she was thanking you as well as me for having this program, talking about this lost history and keeping it forward. The next chat I got was from Lisa Brown. How did Black families support each other when the women went off to war? Was that a difficult thing to break up families? I remember reading one story years ago, and interviewing one of the African-American women and hearing stories about one woman. She had a child, she was single, and when the war broke out and she saw a clear opportunity to take advantage in going into World War II, so she left her child, her son, with another family until she got out of the war. Was that a difficult thing for splitting up families and leaving and going off?
Oh, yes, I think it was for a woman to leave their family and especially if they had a child, because I say you had to give that child up to a custody over to a relative or someone in the community so that you could go into the military. So yes, I would think that would be very, very traumatic. But again, as the lady said, she said she saw that as a way to, first of all, have some money coming in, and also, again, I would imagine she may have used the GI Bill when she got out to further her education. So it was a means of advancement. But of course, yes, it did to break up your family. I would imagine it really it was something you really had to think about before you did that, because it's very hard for you to leave your family. Leave your family behind. But of course, you were trying to make things better in the long run for your family.
What were some of the jobs for Black women after they left the military? They got discharged. And as you indicated, some of them took advantage of that GI Bill, and some went off to college. Some purchased homes from some of the women that I talked to over the years. I'll let you elaborate on that. What were some of the jobs that they went into?
Well, again, most of them had to go back. It was still a segregated society. So they were not, even though they might have been trained for certain things, once they came home, a lot of them were not able to get those particular jobs because, again, it was segregated. So those were the jobs that were not given to Black people. So most of them went back to what they were already doing. Probably was domestic work. Some were tenant farmers. Some some worked in households and things of that nature. So they had to basically go back to what they were going to, as the men did. There were no jobs out there. Being a military, a veteran did not guarantee you a job when you got out. So basically, you had to basically go back to doing the same thing. The same thing with the war workers. They went into the war plants and did the job, but of course, when the war ended, they had to come out of those jobs. So again, segregation also kept them from advancing.
Monica sent another chat again, and she wanted to know, were these women drafted or were they volunteered?
They were volunteered. I'm not sure that there was a draft at that time for the women. But yeah, most of these women volunteered to work. Yeah, that was not a draft for the women.
One serious question. Do you feel most Black women in the military experience, what were their feelings? Was this a turning point in their life by going into the military? Or that just, they saw the clear opportunity of bettering themselves during that time?
Well, yes, they did see that clear opportunity, but a lot of them talked about the discipline. It was, everything was regimented. So they learned how to just to do their job and do it well. So a lot of them talk about it's the discipline that I learned to work on and have a plan as to whatever job I was doing to get that job done. So a lot of them really, really talked about the discipline that they got in the military.
This question is a loaded question. Hopefully you can answer it. What are some of the personal benefits from being a former military person and the disadvantage of having served in the United States military? I don't know if you can answer that.
Well, because I was not military, that would be very difficult for me to answer. But again, I think the advantage of being able to use that GI Bill once they got out, I think that was one of the main things that they talked about. Again, the disadvantage was the fact that they had to come back home and do the jobs that they were doing. They weren't given the jobs that they could have gotten if they had gotten proper training. So a lot of them were not given specialized training other than the schools that I mentioned. So again, there was nothing out there for them once they came out for them to do.
Do you think that Black women's service experience would have been different had they been of European descent or white? Do you think it would have been a different story?
Yeah, of course. Again, everything goes back to segregation. We were segregated, so there was just not there were not opportunities available to them, even as a veteran. And I think some of them, of course, were hurt because you have served your country, but you come back to your civilian jobs and you're still treated like a second-class citizen. So I'm sure that was very, very painful for people who had been in there and served their country.
A question from a Canordis Brown. She was thanking you for your service and your experience in bringing out this history, but she wanted to know, what would you say to young women today who are interested in going into military career?
I would say go, if that is your desire to go. I think there's some opportunities. Again, since the military was desegregated in 1948, you can get training for different things that we could not, that military women could not get trained for during World War II. So I think it's a good opportunity for you to go. I think it's a conversation you need to have with your family. During World War II, a lot of families did not agree with women going into the military because of the stigma of either, I'll go ahead and say it, they said you were either a lesbian or a prostitute if you went into the military. And of course, so that a lot of families did not agree with some of the ladies that went in. And but that stigma is not there now. And so I think if you can get the training that you want to get, Again, talk it over with your family and see what you think is the best way for you to go, and then follow your heart if that is what you really want to do.
I think I can add to that question, and maybe you can respond to that. Military service during World War II was different for Black women compared to today. Your feelings, I think you kind of covered, you touched based on some of it, but can you elaborate on that some more?
Well, again, I think it all has to do with training. You are able now to get training that you were not able to get during World War II. So if there's something specific, like a lot of people that are going into STEM, going to the military as well. So I think it's just, again, a personal decision that you have to make along with your family as to the advantages of a military experience. Now, some people make a career out of it, and do, once they retire, they get a very good income. So I think it's a very, very personal decision that you have to make with your family and what your goals are in life. I would not let anyone that has some negative things to say deter me if that's what I don't want to do. I had a classmate, for instance, that when we got out of college, because when we were in high school, we talked about going into the military, and of course our teachers, oh, of course not, you're not going into the military. But when she got out of college, she didn't tell any of us that she was going into the military, and she went on in and did very well. So but again, the stigma is not there now. That and I think, again, you can get that specialized training and come out and do very, very well.
I'm glad you brought that up, because as you were talking, I reflected on Major Charity Adams Early's book, One Woman's Army. And early on in the book, she talked about when she was teaching at a school, elementary school, and she was studying on the side for her master's. So she happened to be coming home, and she saw these military white women approach her with leaflets, handing them out for Black women to join the Army. Well, she took it home, and at the dinner table, her father, AME, pastor of the AME church, he did not like her going into the military, being though she's teaching and she's studying for her master's. So the back and forth at the dinner table, well, Mama stopped that right there on the corner, stopped the back and forth between her and her father. So in the middle of the night, her mother came into the bedroom and said to her, "Go, honey, follow your dreams." And Major Charities, we know the history from there.
Yeah, let me tell you this story. I was on a program at one of the government agencies, was talking about the wax. And as I was doing my presentation, I could hear a lady in the audience saying, "Yeah, I remember that, yeah." So I realized that there was a lady in the audience that had been in the military. So when we got to the question and answer period, we started talking about the stigma and everything. And so she started talking. And she said that when she went in, her father, who was also in the military, was against her going in, and she went in anyway. And they lost. He was so upset with her, he would not even talk with her. So they corresponded through an aunt. But she said on his deathbed, he told her how very proud he was of her, and that she had reached a rank higher than his. And all of a sudden, this woman burst out and started crying. I didn't know what to do. So I went out in the audience. I went out in the audience. I put my arms around her and just let her talk. And her co-workers after that told me later on that they had never heard her tell that story. That was the first time she felt safe enough to tell the story of her experience of being in the military, and how her father was so upset about her going in.
That's an interesting story. As you were telling this story, I was reflecting on one of the women in the 90s out of Philadelphia that served with the WAC, with Major Charity Adams Early's WAC. And at the end, when I finished the interview, the last question I asked her, she stated to me, "Well, we weren't that important. We weren't important." So she was questioning me, "Why do you want to know about this history? We weren't important." And I stated to her, Yes, you were. You are a part of history. And it's up to me to document that history so the young and old can understand what you've done was lost, and we want to keep that history alive. Monica has another question as we're getting pretty close to closing out within the next 5 minutes. She has another question. White women were hailed as heroes for taking up the slack of performing in non-traditional female jobs to keep the system afloat. Did white women also have a presence in World War II, or was it primarily Black women?
It was both. It was, of course, there were more Black women because, as I said earlier, when Black women went in, it was 10% of the white women that would be coming in. So there was a lot more white women in the army than Black women. So yeah, so white women served as well. So, but again, as we always said, that the Black women did not get the recognition that they deserved for the history that they perform. And again, as Mr. Walker was saying, it is up to us to make sure that we keep this history alive and to document this history. One of the reasons I wanted to interview some of the ladies, now I can tell your story, but no one can tell your story better than you. So as often as I could, I would have them to come out to programs and things of that nature so that they could tell their own story. And a lot of times people would be sitting in the audience with their mouths open because, I mean, they'd heard about the Tuskegee Airmen, most of them, but many of them had not ever heard of Black women serving. So this was new history for them. And one of the things that we want to make sure that your story is important. So that was because I do Black women's history. I want women to know that your story is important, whatever you did. So that was one of the reasons I did this military, because I some of this stuff I hadn't heard of. So I wanted to make sure that we get these things documented. And again, I like to also thank Mr. Walker for all he's doing to make sure that our history gets documented, the military history.
I have a person that has a hand up and want to ask a question if hopefully she's on mute. VK, what is your question?
Yes, thank you. First, I want to thank you for this presentation. It's very important. And as you say, we must tell our history. We must tell our stories. Once we start looking it up, I have been amazed. I belong to a Black history group. And so we are on a quest to find stories that have not been told. One of the presentations I recently did was on Black women in the military. And oh my God, I was amazed because Black women have been involved in every single war we've had. And it's very undocumented. I just want to say that. So I just want to thank you, because the more we tell our stories, the more it becomes known what we've actually done for this country.
Yes.
So
now, what Black history group do you belong to?
Well, it's a small group. We're out of East Orange, the Fellowship Empowerment Center. In fact, it was one of the members that texted me about this Zoom meeting this morning. I came in late, but I came in. And so that's what we do. It's about 15 of us, and we meet once a month, and we look for untold history. And also, we're also working on trying to get in the school system for the school system to actually teach Black history. I'm not talking about the other stuff they're talking about, the critical race theory. That's not what I'm talking about, because I think that's been turned around, tossed upside down to create the problems that it has. But our stories actually need to be told.
Yes, yes.
We've been large contributors to American history. Our history is American history, and I think that needs to be known.
Yes, it does.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. One final question, Dr. Woods. There have been different wars in this country. Why do you feel historians tend to leave African-American men and women out of the history books?
Well, I think in every field that we have been left out. So one of the reasons that I do Black history, I've been doing it for over 50 years now, is the fact that we need to get our stories documented. And if I don't know if you check me out on Facebook, I do most of my postings are on Black history. I've been in this field 50 years. I'm still learning things about Blacks in all areas. So it's important for us to try to keep this history alive. I'm also a part of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. This is a group that Carter G. Woodson started, of course, Black History Week, which is now Black History Month. And so we have chapters all over the country. So that one of the things that we try to do is to make sure that we get this history out there to people so that they would know. And I worked at Howard University with students. So I also, tried to get them to do stories of topics that we didn't know about. But then I'd also have to help them find the information so that they can get their papers done. But of course, sometimes it sparks an interest. And one person might say, well, I like, this is a topic I want to find out more about. And they may do even more research on it. So one of the things is just making sure that we document and keep this accurate history out there.
One final question, Dr. Woods. If you have to leave a lasting message about this lost history on what African American women did during World War II, what would that be within a minute?
Well, only thing I can say is to keep researching. There's a lot of materials now on the internet that you can find, but just keep researching and then sharing this history, especially with students. Students especially don't know our history. And that's one thing we have to really make sure that we keep things before them.
Dr. Woods, can you leave your contact, email, telephone number if you want to, any contact information, publications? So if people want to follow up and research your publications and get in contact with you about the topic, can you go ahead?
I'm gonna just put my email in here. You can Google me on, just put my name in the Google and my bio, and things should come up. I have lots of publications out there. Again, I've been in this field for 50 years and I am still learning. That's the main thing. I am still learning. So it's a lot of our history that's just buried that we need to and encourage people to do the research so that we can get more accurate information out there.
And public, do not worry. This broadcast is going to be rebroadcast tonight at 7 o'clock on the Sankofa African American 3D Museum website. It'll be on the Facebook website. If you go to the Facebook page, Sankofa, my link, and it'll bring you there at 7 o'clock. We're going to trim this down. It'll be up tonight at 7 p.m. So anybody that missed it, you can re-catch it. I will also leave this message to you. Anybody that wants any more information about this lost history, I recommend picking up Brenda L. Moore's book titled To Serve My Country, To Serve My Race, and also Major Charity Adams Early's book, One Woman's Army, and my book, Sweet Georgia Brown, that focuses on African American women in World War II. All of these tags will be at the end tonight, the tag of both the covers of all three books, and this rebroadcast program will be up tonight at 7 p.m. on the Facebook Sankofa African American 3D Museum link. Also, please pass on the word about Sankofa. A lot of people don't know we launched this virtual reality 3D museum website. It's the first 3D African American 3D website in the country and around the world. You go to www.saa3dm.org. It takes you right to the main page. You log in. It is 4 floors of African American 3D museum focusing on our history from Africa all the way up to the 4th floor. And now we're going into the metaverse. That's going to happen. So we're going to have a different look between now and next year. I also would like to thank Lisa Brown, Constant Burns, and thank you, Dr. Janice Sim Woods, for being a part of this program. everybody pass on the word about Sankofa and about this rebroadcast. Thank you for coming aboard. And I think we just made it right on time too. Thank you for attending, and I appreciate your time too.
Thank you for having me, and let's continue the research.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everyone.
Have a great day, everybody. And happy Veterans Day too.
Happy Veterans Day.